Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is supported by Bear Crop Science. We're joined today on RealAgriculture.com by Jon Driedger. He is with Farmlink Marketing. Welcome today, Jon.
Thank you, Sean.
Jon, let's talk about canola today. Interesting things happening. I guess depending on which chart you look at, there's maybe an argument to be had that canola is definitely on the downtrend. Would you agree with that?
You know, I'm not sure, Sean, that I would say it's necessarily on a downtrend. We've been seeing ourselves trade in a bit of a range here. Certainly the top end of that range is down from where it was earlier, say through much of the summer, when we would trade up into the 580s, 590s, and approach $600. We obviously haven't been there in a little while. But having said that, we seem to have been holding some support here around the 550-ish mark. We have traded a little lower than that, especially during some of those days when we've had that intense volatility in outside markets. But we seem to be showing some reasonable support here. Now, it's not to say that we couldn't necessarily trade a little lower. We are heading into harvest, and it is a time of year when seasonally you might see some prices come under a little bit of pressure. At the same time, we seem to... There's good demand in this market. Old crop stocks are relatively tight, and that is providing some underlying support. So not say that we might not necessarily trade a little lower from where we're sitting at today, which is in the lower 550s here this morning in the November futures. But I'm not sure that would necessarily set us up for a downtrend per se, where we would see some material weakness anyway.
Yeah, so do you think we're kind of in that trading range then between the 550 to 575 then is basically the reality?
Yeah, I think so. You know, we could maybe trade a little lower than that, certainly. And part of all of this, is there's just so much uncertainty in outside markets, which is causing some spillover volatility. But we've been trading in that range for the last few weeks here, and somewhere along the line, it seems like we have pretty good support underneath this market. They really have a hard time bearing it, even when these outside markets are totally falling apart around us. At the same time, certainly we're looking at a bigger crop than maybe what was feared a few weeks ago. This crop has come along. It's done a lot of catching up. There's certainly some areas where there's some problems, but also a good chunk of Saskatchewan and good parts of Alberta look in good shape. It's a bigger crop than we were looking at a few weeks ago, and that's going to cap the upside a little bit. So we could see ourselves in a relatively tight range here for the next little while. I wouldn't be surprised at all by that.
Yeah, well, I look at some of as I travel through Alberta and parts of Saskatchewan. You're very right. The canola that is there looks very good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, overall, I mean, we're getting some real early harvest results here in Manitoba that aren't great. Certainly, there's some patches that. Whether we got too much heat and dry in certain stretches, but for sure, overall, this crop is definitely in a lot better shape than people were fearing earlier in the summer, and we'll be trading a little bit of a bigger number than previous expectations. But having said all that, I mean, old crop stocks are relatively tight. Demand stayed firm right through the summer. Crush demand is strong. Exports have been good. It looks like that's going to continue to be the case here again for the coming crop year. So even if there's maybe the crop is a little bigger than what expectations were, that's not necessarily overly bearish per se. A bigger crop maybe takes a little bit of what some of the upside potential might be, but demand is good, and that shows up, and it seems like there's buying that comes in the market, and buyers get coverage and end users get coverage when we see these periods of these sell-offs, and that's helping provide a little bit of a floor even when some of these outside markets are just coming unglued around us.
Yeah, I've had a couple conversations with a couple farmers that actually don't have any canola pre-sold. They're still sitting at 0%. What do you say to a farmer like that at this point?
Well, I think it's just prudent to take some coverage here and take a little bit off the table. I mean, having said that, we don't necessarily see the market come unglued. I mean, prices are good, prices are profitable, and one of the things we've certainly seen in the last few weeks is that the world is an uncertain place, and we can go through periods where maybe this market does get pressed lower. That may have nothing to do with canola fundamentals per se. And while I don't think that this canola market will come under the kind of pressure where they bury it and keep it down, it's not that it's not that there's a 0% of that chance of that happening. So we've certainly have pre-sold some of our canola. I think if guys get the kind of coverage that they need to cover at least sort of their storage and cash flow needs here for fall, that makes it easy to be patient in the event that we do come under some further harvest pressure, some outside markets or something like that. Longer term, I think the outlook is still at least fairly steady and probably favorable, but you just have uncertainty of periods where you're not sure what's going to happen. Being able to take a little off and lock in some good levels makes it easier to be patient when you maybe wait for this market to come around where the outlook is maybe better than what it might be if we do see some windows of heavier selling.
Yeah, and how much impact is some of the external economic situation having on the oilseed complex? Canola, soybean, stuff like that.
Mhm. It actually held up pretty well last week. You look at the kind of beating that crude oil took, and virtually almost all financial markets, and gold going the other way. Just tremendous volatility, and some of that for sure spills over to the grain markets. We're not totally immune to it, but you look at corn, and you look at soybeans and canola, and a number of these markets. I mean, one of the things is that the underlying fundamentals in a lot of these markets are still fairly solid, and so that has helped cushion some of the outside influence. The other thing that has happened is over the last number of months, with some of the market volatility, we've also flushed out a lot of the longs out of the market that would be more
Get out of
susceptible.
here, longs.
Yeah, some of the weak longs, some of the outside money got themselves flushed out during previous volatility. So you're not sitting with this great big excessive long position by fickle money to the same degree that you did before. So all of those things have helped buffer a little bit how much that has spilled over directly into the futures market. Having said that, you're not immune to it when there's margin calls, when people are scared, when people are looking for safe havens. They sell the good and the bad, and they just look to park their money in cash, and a certain amount of that for sure would spill over, especially if you get these windows of real heightened uncertainty and almost panic.
Speaking of the longs and large block hedge funds and stuff like that, is there still a lot of interest in the canola market from those groups?
Yeah, the grain market attracts a certain amount of interest for sure. There's the whole story about food. Food inflation is still a huge issue in China and India. The whole talk about the amount of food production that needs to increase over the next number of years going forward as economies develop and so on. Certainly, all of that stuff is still a story that resonates with outside money, and as stock returns maybe start getting disappointing, people start chasing returns because yields are low, those sorts of things. It's not hard to put together a compelling case why food and agriculture maybe has an interesting story to tell and attracts outside money. One of the things also to remember is how small these agricultural markets are. So it doesn't take a lot of money to have a disproportionate amount of influence in corn, in wheat, certainly even a small market like canola. So
Yeah.
there is for sure interest there, and over a longer period of time that'll continue to be the case. Again, you have these windows where people panic, and these stories get overwhelmed by sort of the panic of the moment. Those kinds of windows will happen, but the longer term story still has interest outside money, certainly.
What is Farmlink forecasting in terms of canola acres that actually got planted? I know you were lower than StatsCan, but where'd you end up?
We're looking at about 18.5 is what our thoughts are. Certainly, there are definitely some acres that did not get in that were intended to get in. Canola is probably one of those crops that'll have lost fewer acres, relatively speaking, than most others. Because if there's one crop that guys really focus on trying putting in the ground over almost any other, it's canola. So our thoughts are 18.5, but I guess we'll find out what StatsCan comes out with here in about a week or so.
Are you guys? What are you? So you've been holding that 18.5 number for a while, though.
Yeah, we've been holding that for a while. Our initial thoughts were a little bit higher prior to all the issues that we had with seeding this spring. So we lowered our number a little bit in light of that, just knowing simply that there were acres that didn't get planted. But we haven't deviated a whole lot from that number. We've been holding that fairly steady, and we feel reasonably good about it today. But I guess time will tell as to whether that gets confirmed by StatsCan or what kind of number StatsCan comes out with, and whether that's a number that the trade is going to believe or not.
So we got acres. What is some of your customer feedback coming back to you in terms of potential yield? Where do you think we're going to be in terms of yield?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think one of the challenges of a year like this, kind of like last year, is where there's acres that didn't get seeded, but there's acres that got seeded, and there's pockets of drown out. Some areas that did really poorly and get abandoned, and how all of that comes together is kind of hard to back into that. But overall, yield wise, certainly Manitoba will probably a little below average overall. Some areas that look pretty good. certainly some areas that don't look great. Alberta overall is generally fairly good for sort of the central and the southern parts. I think the Peace River region has some issues in terms of some areas that are struggling a little bit. Some of the reports that we hear is that at this stage of the game, they're thinking it's going to be a good crop, maybe not quite the bin busting size that we saw a couple of years ago in terms of yields, but a good sized crop. And Saskatchewan overall looks quite good as well. Again, some areas could see record yields, others maybe not to the same extent that we saw a couple of years ago when we had monster yields, but certainly a very good looking crop overall. But we'll see. We're just getting into where we're getting into cutting and early harvest in just a few spots. So the next couple of weeks will tell us a lot.
Yeah. Okay, John, thanks a lot, and we will talk to you again soon.
Always a pleasure, Sean. Thanks.